Hi, I'm Kevin Zimmerman of Unlocking Black History on YouTube, and welcome to this live stream. In this live session, we're going to answer some questions discussed in reference to a video I produced about the Civil War. I'm going to give you 5 strong facts supporting that the Civil War was about slavery. I'm going to give you 5 common arguments claiming that the war was not about slavery. And I'm going to conclude with 5 counter arguments showing that it was about slavery. This is going to be fun. Now, some question, why does this matter now? I suggest that it's important to know that Black history reflects that this nation's historical pattern doesn't disappear. It just evolves. And some of the things that we are witnessing today are the same mentality that we've seen recorded when we go back to 1865. Now, in order for us to be successful at what we're doing here, we're going to have to give a synopsis of where we were at the time. Okay. Prior to the Civil War, the South had helped America propel to the status of a superpower that came about because of the production of 3 primary products: cotton, tobacco, and sugar. But what ended up happening was America began to evolve. And in the North, industrialization had begun to take shape and form. So what that did ultimately was we have this picture here of the free states or blue states in the North who were focusing on the expansion of industrialization. You see in the red, we have the slave states or Confederate states, if you want to call it that. Well, we can call it that. And their primary focus was the expansion of chattel slavery. Now, the gray areas that you see there, the gray areas is the new territory that the North, free states, were focused on expanding industrialization. Counter to that, once again, that gray area going towards the west, you see the slave states or the southern states wanted to expand the the institution of chattel slavery towards the west. But then comes the man named Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln campaigned upon the refusal or the opposition of expanding slavery any further. Now, I want to be clear in that statement. Abraham Lincoln's position was not to end slavery. As a matter of fact, when he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, that only freed the slaves in the Confederate states or the southern states. That did not free slaves in the border states. However, he campaigned upon not allowing the expansion of slavery. As a result, we see the secession. The southern states, 11 of them, seceded from the Union. Now, this in turn was viewed by the Union or the northern states as an act of treason, being that anytime someone takes up arms against the Union, that is considered an act of treason. And the Southern states were willing to die on their sword to defend, depending upon how you want to view this, to defend either the institution of slavery or the states' rights, their rights to be able to govern themselves. So that was the situation that we found ourselves faced with when we get to this point. And to recap, the South, which are the planners, wanted to expand the institution of chattel slavery west. The North, who had developed industrialization, felt that that was the way to expand, going towards the Western territories. Abraham Lincoln runs to become president, and he runs on the promise to fight against and to be in opposition of the expansion of chattel slavery. That led to the succession of the Confederacy, the 11 states that succeeded or separated from the Union and took up arms to fight against the Union, which the Union considered to be an act of treason. And that's when the war started. So that's the synopsis that we're faced with. And with that being said, we're going to get into the first 5 points that I consider very strong facts to support that the Civil War was about slavery. Point number 1, the secession documents explicitly name slavery. It names that they were clear. States that left the Union clearly stated that the reason was that they wanted to maintain the institution of slavery. I'll be able to show you here in what was called not this one, I'm sorry, let's remove that one. Let's remove that one. And I will get the appropriate one up here for you, add that one. And here we can clearly see that this is the Mississippi Declaration. And the Mississippi Declaration clearly tells us that our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if that's what the document says, that is a direct primary source of evidence that the reason for their taking a position in the Civil War was because of slavery. Now, point number 2, the Confederacy was founded to protect the institution of slavery. The Confederate Constitution explicitly protected slavery and even prohibited that any laws that would impair it. How do we know? Because that solely went against the Constitution at the time. My third point, and it's a strong point, the speeches by Confederate leaders themselves. I'm going to remove this one, and I'm going to show you this one. This is what is famously known as the Cornerstone Speech by Alexander Stephens. And it reads, "Our new government is founded upon exactly this idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. Now, I find it hard that anybody would want to try and not justify that statement clearly in letting it be known that the reason for the Civil War and the reason why the Confederacy was even established was solely for the protection of the institution of slavery. Nevertheless, point number 4, the expansion of slavery was the central political conflict. Okay, we saw this with the likes of the Missouri Compromise and the Kansas-Nebraska Act, where it was all about whether slavery could be expanded into the new territories. And finally, the 5th point, point number 5, was that the election of 1860 triggered the secession. And we know that to be true. Abraham Lincoln ran on stopping the expansion of slavery, and his election caused the southern states to succeed even before he took office. So, with that being said, we're going to look at the 5 foundational facts that I've provided you to support what I'm stating, that the Civil War was about slavery. Point number 1 were the secession documents themselves, where they explicitly named slavery. Point number 2 was the Confederacy was founded to protect the institution of slavery. Point number 3, speeches by Confederate leaders. Point number 4, the expansion of slavery was a primary political conflict. And point number 5 was the election of 1860 is what triggered the succession of the Confederate States. Okay, we're going to transition at this point now into the 5 common arguments claiming the Civil War was not about slavery. Know that when you hear these arguments, these fall in alignment with what is known as the lost cause interpretation or the lost cause ideology. Point number 1, we heard it then, we hear it often now in 2026. Point number 1, the reason why the Civil War wasn't about slavery is it was about states' rights. The claim that the southern states were defending their right to govern themselves. Point number 2, it was about economic differences. Some argue that the conflict was industrial North versus the agricultural South. That's what the claim was. It wasn't about slavery. It was about the economic differences, the industrial North versus the agricultural South. Point number 3, most Southerners did not own slaves. So with that, we're going to put up this diagram, and we see that in the South, the white class structure in the South during 1860, that 17.2% of slave owners had 1 to 9 slaves. Okay. Then we see that 6.6% of slave owners enslaved anywhere between 10 to 99 people. And then there's that less than 1% that enslaved approximately 100 or more enslaved people. And according to the diagram that we see here, 76.1%, or basically pretty much, um, basically more than, excuse me, basically more than 3/4, or approximately 3/4 of the southern states did not own slaves. Okay, so I want to bring into play here something in a few minutes. Okay, so let's go from there. When we look at most Southerners didn't own slaves, since the majority didn't own slaves, the argument is that it could not have been because of slavery. That's the argument. Then point number 4, the North really didn't care about slavery. And one of the bases for that argument that the North didn't care about slavery was a statement that was made by Abraham Lincoln himself. When Abraham Lincoln made the statement, "If I could save the Union and keep slavery, I would." And that statement is a pivotal point. Well, a not a pivotal point, but an anchor where we see many of the southern states claiming that the Civil War was not about slavery because the North did not care about slavery themselves. That was the one of the 5 points of arguments. Okay. And point number 5. Tariff and taxes. A popular claim is that the federal tariffs and taxes hurt the Southern economy. So just to highlight real quick, I'm going to share with you that the argument that the Confederate States or the South had that the Civil War was not about slavery is that point number 1, it was about states' rights. Then we go on to point number 2, which was it was about economic differences, the industrial North versus the agricultural South. Then there's the point number 3, most Southerners did not own slaves. 3/4 of the country, 3/4 of the Southern states did not own slaves. So in their argument, they suggest that since 3/4 of the Southern states did not own slaves, then the argument could not have been about slavery itself. Okay. And then point number 5 was, no, I'm sorry, point number 4 was the North didn't care about slavery. And that came about being founded upon the argument made by Abraham Lincoln that if I could keep the Union and keep slavery, I would. And last but not least, the argument that it was tariff and taxes that caused the war. Now, when we observe the differences in the positions taken about the Civil War, we can see some of the challenges that we continue to have in what's called this great American experiment. That being said, I'm going to transition now into my 5 counter arguments showing that the secession and the Civil War was in fact about slavery. Point number 1, states' rights. My counter, right to do what? Southern states specifically argue that they continue to argue the right to own slaves. The Southern states even opposed that when a slave escaped to the northern state, and the northern states would not enforce the what was called the Fugitive Slave Act, that they had an issue with that. So that clearly points that the states' right argument collapses, clearly collapses, because your primary focus was to own slaves. Point number two, the economic argument. Slavery was the economic argument. The Southern economy depended upon slave labor, especially for cotton. So if you remove slavery, the economy collapses. Therefore, the economic argument still points back to slavery. Point number three, most Southerners did not own slaves. However, even though most didn't own slaves, slavery upheld a racial hierarchy that benefited all white citizens both socially and economically. Many aspired to own slaves, or the truth of the matter remains that they still supported the institution of slavery. So that debunks that argument. Point number four is that the North didn't care about slavery. And we know the argument that we've emphasized based upon the statement of Abraham Lincoln. Yet, we know that the cause of the secession came about because President Lincoln campaigned upon ceasing the opportunity for the South to expand slavery into the new territories. And when he did that, they succeeded well before he took office. And then, of course, the last point, tariffs and taxes were the primary reason. But slavery really was never emphasized. When we look at what was stated, tariff and taxes were never mentioned in the secession documents. We looked at each succession document, or we looked at multiple succession documents. We looked at the statement made by the Confederate leaders. Tariff and taxes never appeared in any of those documents. However, slavery was repeatedly emphasized in the succession documents. So some would ask, why then is this important today? I suggest to you this. In 2023, Nikki Haley was running for the office of the presidency. And at a town hall meeting, she was asked the question, what was the cause of the Civil War? Now, we often hear where people would ask that we leave the past in the past, but there has to be something that is strongly felt about the ideology of one who would accept that the Civil War was not about slavery. So much so, one asked directly this question in 2023, which was at this point in time, I don't even believe it was 3 years ago. So if we're not addressing the issue that happened during the Civil War, and that mentality is transforming to the present, then we still have an issue. And her answer clearly demonstrates that the issue of slavery, the issue of the white superiority ideology has transitioned and evolved from 1865 through 2023 and is still amongst us in 2026. Because what was her answer? Her answer fell within those 5 arguments that the states took. And she initially said it was not about slavery. The Civil War was not about slavery, and went on to, as often, create a narrative that is often presented to us to support their actions. But later she came back to admit that the Civil War was about slavery, but amongst that, it was also about many other things. And so that's important for us to keep in mind, because when we look at the Civil War being a foundation to the preservation of slavery for the purpose of expansion and political power, we cannot ignore what we witness today. I live right here in the state of Texas. And right here in the state of Texas, when you go to the state capitol, the Confederate monument sits outside of the state capitol in Austin, Texas. So one would ask, hey, we've evolved. We need to leave the past in the past. But we clearly see that Confederate monuments are erected all across the South to serve a couple of points. One, it is to glamorize the Confederate troops that lost the war. And they lost the war defending the institution of slavery, in spite of whatever narrative they want to put on it or spin. America became a superpower because the production of our enslaved people to produce the cotton, the tobacco, and the sugar made the South wealthy. And it gave them the superior, in their minds, position, white superiority, to where even the Confederate Proclamation stated that the black man's place was in slavery inferior to the white man. But still, that monument stands not only in the Texas state capitol, but all across the South in many places. It's important that we realize that. So when we see that statue, or when we see someone defending the way of the South under the insertion of states' rights, we will have an idea of what that mindset is all about. And when we have that knowledge, when we have that idea, and we can look at the past and pull that forward, and we see those same arguments being manifested today, which we've always done when it comes to Black history, then we can say, I see the pattern. It didn't go away. It just evolved. And when we can recognize that, then we can make our clear, strategic stand that we will forever fight against the ideology that anyone is superior to us. Ladies and gentlemen, that's my time. I hope you get something out of this. Please give me some feedback if you like. I look forward to it. And I look forward to talking to you on another topic about that manifests under Unlocking Black History. And I'll talk to you next Monday. Take care.